Video games became synonymous with a single word, Atari, the company that would be founded on June 27, 1972 by a young, fresh out of college Nolan Bushnell and Ted Dabney. The word Atari actually refers to the board game Go, when an enemy's pieces are threatened to be taken, an appropriate analogy for the organization that would dominate an industry. Influenced by Ralph Baer's Magnavox Odyssey and its own tennis game, Bushnell tasked program designer Al Alcorn with coming up with their own tennis game, or in Atari's case, table tennis. And Pong, the first commercially successful video game of all time, was the pioneered product. Baer, the now revered father of video games, was not all too pleased at what was perceived to be a violation of closed-door demos, and a lawsuit was sure and a settlement was swift, but the payment was pennies to Atari, who became the brand to beat in this new industry, and whose millions made were a source of massive motivation for this unlikely group of chill-out colleagues. A party company they became known as, an atmosphere of leisure, home to drink, drugs, and don't worry, be happy. After all, these were men and women fresh out of school in the early 70s. Atari wasn't about ties or press suits. They were about showing up to work whenever you want and exploring your ideas in a fun faculty. Bushnell clearly knew what made his team tick, because Atari consistently produced some of the most well-known and classic games in an already competitive market, ensuring arcade titles like Centipede, Breakout, Battlezone, Asteroids, and Lunar Lander, and we already know all about the legacy of those last two, kept kids pushing quarters. And then, fate reared its ugly head. Atari was sold to Warner for $28 million, which meant that the company's stoner, get high, and get creative counterculture was over. The suits invaded and would shake up the establishment with a series of bad moves, one after the other. For the first time, the arcades were introduced to the home with the Atari Video Computer System, later dubbed the 2600. To no surprise, it was a huge hit. The idea of being able to play Pac-Man in the comfort of your own home was a futuristic and awesome concept. The problem was that the game sucked. Many of the classics the world had fallen in love with on a big wooden cabinet were just watered-down ports of the originals. And then, a bigger blow. 4 of Atari's best designers, including David Crane, left the company, fed up with Warner's treating of its game developers, and went on to form a little company known as Activision, which would keep making the best titles for the 2600 like Pitfall. You see, it was generally regarded at the time that making games was a no-brainer, a task no more tedious than working on an assembly line. And because of that fatal error, dozens of quote-unquote developers itching to get a piece of the action saturated the industry, filling it to the brim with bad games. And to make things worse, the first console war between Atari and its new rival in television introduced a concept that no one understood. In 1982, the Atari 5200 was released, but whoa, I just picked up an Atari 2600 a few years ago, now I gotta get a whole new machine? You see, the notion of the console cycle, of pushing the hardware to stay competitive, it didn't compute with a generation of people who had the same television and record player for 20 years. All of a sudden they gotta start buying new stuff like a few years later? A crash was imminent. Folk just got fed up of the same boring, brutally bad games. Games like E.T. standing as a symbol of the debacle. And by 1983, the sport was in shambles, and video games became just another fad. Until the Japanese would right the American wrongs. But that's for another day. Today, Atari is a mere shadow of its former self, but the mere mention of this monolith to those old enough to remember its heyday is enough to strike up sentiment. It's the definition of a video game. Atari was the art, the company that launched the video game industry in America and set the seeds for its destruction. June 27th, 1972, this day in gaming.